Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. And so last time I made my video under a different title. I think it was Notes from the Underground, which is impossible to find because I named it after a famous Dostoevsky story. So I chose something that's hopefully more original. Also, I got up to the age of about 11 and I indicated that I was going to go on, but I changed my mind because this brought up so many memories, more memories, some of them which were rather important to events to come. So I'm just going to go back, more or less back to the beginning, and talk about some of that for now. So I said that when my parents met, he was middle-aged and she was in her late teens. He was 20 years older, so basically 18 to 38. Not a huge difference. Okay. And then I indicated that my father wasn't super famous, which is true, but my parents knew all of the fantasy and science fiction writers of that era, including the really famous ones. Even Philip K. Dick, who is close friends with both my parents. I remember meeting him once when I was quite young. I do not remember him building me a sandbox, but apparently he did. So that was nice of him. So moving right along, Belize. So first of all, it wasn't called Belize back then. It was called British Honduras. And that's because it was still a British colony. So I recall in Gales Point, they had their Independence Day, so to speak. They weren't independent yet, but nevertheless, they had their equivalent of a 4th of July on September 10th, and it was called St. George's Key Day. And I do remember being in Gales Point, and they had, their small town version of a celebration. But I remember all the other kids were standing on the sides of the road, waving their little paper British Honduras flags. And I said, I want a flag too. So they gave me one, and I got to be a patriotic British Honduran resident as well. Now, a number of other things happened in Belize that I forgot to really get to. My mother's boyfriend at the time there, his first name was Richard. Besides being a minor beatnik poet and a drug addict, he was also an anarchist. So I guess I got that in me somehow. And so we lived not very far up from the ground, and critters were around. But I'm going to talk mainly about chickens now. There was this little chicken, not full grown, that would come in, and I liked him. His name was Paul. But then there were the adult chickens, and the adult chickens there, and this is not humorous. This part is not humorous. They were much meaner, I think, than American chickens. So I had two negative experiences with Belizean chickens. One was I was with my father, and this hen had her nest, as I recall, right by the side of the road, and I stepped in it, and she attacked me. I think my father protected me. But then another time I was in Belize, I was in Gales Point, and my mom was asleep at this point. And nobody in my family, it's a big no-no to wake anybody up from asleep, especially my mom or my stepfather. So I went outside quietly, and there was this rooster. And I don't know why. Maybe I looked at him wrong, and he just ran over and attacked me physically. He was as big as I was. It was terrifying, and it wasn't just, a little kid getting scared. It was truly dangerous. So I started screaming, and my mom came out. She heard me screaming, and she started yelling at me for waking her up. So, yeah, I might as well. I had, much like the bullying, I had a narrative in my mind of basically having been an abused kid. And I was some of the time, but as I get older and those people, my three parent figures are all gone. And, maybe I'm a little mellower. Some positive memories have been emerging as well. So I'll try to share both. But there were times when my mom could be, I don't know. I mean, I think doing that was a little pathological because I've heard little kids, scream when they're being fussy. And I've also heard them scream when they're truly in terror. Someone put a couple of little kids in a sweat lodge. It was dark and got hot, so they started screaming. It doesn't sound alike at all. Little kids in terror sound very different from little kids that are just being fussy, And you would think that a mother would know that, but maybe not. Yeah, so I mentioned that I was twice exceptional, meaning exceptionally bright in some areas and exceptionally the opposite of that in others. I think that was true of my parents as well, probably both of them. Maybe they were both on the autistic spectrum as well. My father was a genius as far as reading prolifically, writing prolifically, knowing a lot of stuff, but he couldn't drive or ride a bicycle or swim. I can't ride or bicycle or drive. I can swim. And even so, I don't know if this is going to turn into a light bulb joke, but he was buying lamps at one point. He had friends that lived in the room next door in the flea circus. He was buying these lamps, and he would say, "Oh, this lamp is broken," and he would gave it to his friends, and they would just realize that the light bulb had burned out and needed to be replaced. Every time his light bulb burned out, he thought it was broke. The lamp was broken. He'd give it away until they finally told him, "Look, we've got too many lamps from you already, and you don't need to be giving them away because it's an easy fix." They had to explain that. And he was a writer in the days of the manual typewriter, which has a ribbon. It gets worn out every so often, has to be changed. Most writers of that era knew how to do that because it was kind of, the typewriter was their most important tool. But he didn't. He had to take it in to get someone else to change it. And so did I until modern times came along and manual typewriters were not much of a thing anymore. So, yeah. And in addition to that, my mother was a narcissist. And much later, when my stepfather was dying, it became very clear to everybody just how much of a narcissist she was. While I was looking up personality disorders and diagnosing her myself as an amateur, as a narcissist, two other old friends of the family who were both psychologists, literal psychologists, they were around then, and they told my stepfather, "Sorry, but your wife is clinically narcissistic." Well, there's a lot of talk about narcissism on the internet these days, and some of it kind of bothers me because they talk about them as demon possessed, like literally demon possessed in some cases. Talk about the narcissistic smell. Do other personality disorders have a smell? I don't know. Yeah, so they talk about them as pure evil demonic forces in some cases. They're not. They're people who have a mental disorder. That's all. It is a mental disorder that can be very toxic on people around them, but it's not metaphysical and they're not pure evil. So she could be nice sometimes, but then she could be not so nice. So that's Billy's. The Haight Ashbury. The Haight Ashbury, people talk about, so there's this time period called the Summer of Love, and I think it was loving for a little longer than that, maybe a year or two, I'm not sure, but not for very long, really. And so, people come over and they say, I saw homeless rather than hippies. The Summer of Love is over. I mean, this was decades later. I'm like, duh, yeah, it's over. Why do you think it's called the summer? Because it wasn't very long. And the marking that I remember about how the vibe changed, the whole situation changed. I was sitting somewhere with my mom, and apparently she had a bunch of silver homemade jewelry in her purse, and some guy came along and snatched it and ran away. So they're criminals, but the kind of person who would snatch a purse from a young woman with a little kid, that's not a criminal with a code of ethics. That's not what used to be called a Johnson, a criminal with a code of ethics. That's just, I don't know, that's just an a-hole criminal. And there was more and more of that. So what I forgot to mention, so after my mom moved there first, and then my father also moved to the Haight Ashbury, and we lived in I remember we lived in a painted red Victorian. The Haight Ashbury was, it was mostly Victorians, and they were very beautiful, and the hippies painted them in lots of interesting colors. And then after my father moved in, well, he got a place, and I moved in with him at least some of the time. He got his mom to move in from New York. So now my grandmother lived there too. Obviously an older woman at the time. And my father said she would say things like, why are these people just sitting around doing nothing? Which is understandable coming from a New Yorker. But he said, overall, that behavior we would have been gladly willing to settle for. I would have been willing to settle for rather than the rest of the behavior that came along. I remember sleeping with my grandmother, and my mom said she toilet trained me instead of my mom having to toilet train me, which sounds right. I slept with her, and there's this, like, she snored, okay? And as a little kid, I was laying there, and it was like patterns were forming. Her snores were making patterns to me, just like when you watch clouds, and I thought, so this snore makes me think of a sheep, but it wasn't like she sounded like a sheep. But the next day, I think I said something like, oh yeah, one of your snores sounded like a sheep, and my father was like, shh, shh. They didn't understand. Yeah. So then I moved to Sausalito, and yeah, I had this Well, as a child, I had a pretty nice room. It was pretty big. It had my bed, it had the TV, it had all these stuffed animals and real animals sometimes, and a bunch of comic books on the shelves. So that was pretty nice. When I was little, I could crawl in through the cat door. So I did. Um, and sometimes, so these are some of the good memories that emerge were like, for example, on my birthdays, there was this bakery nearby that was really good, and they would make customized birthday cakes. So one year they got me a dinosaur themed birthday cake. One year it was a Peanuts characters themed birthday cake. When I turned 7, I remember this distinctly. I had seen those vodka billboards for something called Crown 7. And it showed the number 7, very large, with a gold crown on it. Now, I didn't know from vodka, but I did get the message that when you turn 7, you should have a crown. And so I got I asked my parents to give me one. They got me this gold crown made out of cardboard, but yeah, gold with fake glass jewels. So that was kind of cool, but then there was the other stuff. Remember my mom told me to clean my room, and she said, and while you're cleaning your room, organize those boxes. I had cardboard boxes with stuff in them. And in order to organize a box full of stuff, you first have to take the stuff out. So I was doing that. I'd done that. And my mom came back in and said, this room isn't any cleaner. It's even messier than it was, yada, yada, yada. So at the end of the day, she was like, I had to be on him all day to keep him cleaning my room. And that was actually on my birthday, too. They wound up taking me to a very nice dinner on my birthday, but still, like, my stomach was in knots over having to deal with all that. When I was 11, my brother was already in existence. He was about 2. I had to babysit him a lot, by the way. He was cute most of the time, but my parents, they were going to be home late for some reason, and the housekeeper was there, and I was supposed to come right home straight from school and be there to help, out or whatever. But I got on the wrong bus, and I wound up getting home super late. And my brother, bless his 2-year-old heart, put a roll of toilet paper down into the toilet and clogged it. So when I got home, my parents were furious. Now, most of the time I slept naked. As a small kid, I had told my mom, I'm always putting pajamas on and taking pajamas off. Why do I have to bother to do this? And she said, okay, you don't. You can sleep naked if you want. I also didn't wear underwear for most of my life. I just didn't like confining stuff. But when I got home and the housekeeper basically told my parents what had happened and the toilet was clogged and yada, yada, I thought I could get out of the situation by going to bed immediately. So I was in bed naked, and there were my mattress. It was a mattress on the floor, but it was right in the corner is the point. It was easy to trap me. So my parents came in and started yelling at me, and I was naked and I could not escape. And my stepfather asked me something, and I said, I don't know how to answer that question. And he said, I don't want to hear that bullshit, and started kicking the bed. And I've had these neuroses since then. I don't want to sleep between somebody and a wall. Uh, it makes me a little panicky. And I'm hypersensitive to situations where it's a no-win and anything I say will be wrong. I don't like that. And I don't like what I call the hostile rhetorical question, which is like, are those clothes supposed to be on the floor? Or what are you looking at? Or you got a problem? Anything like that, because my mind wants to figure out a logical way to answer the question, but there is none. They're not actually asking for information. They're just hassling you. So yeah, so all that stuff happened. So now let me talk about the dogs in my family, because that's kind of interesting too. My parents got a little dog when I was very little. I don't really remember him very well. I remember when he was taken to the vet to be put down, and my stepfather said, well, would you like to come with us to say goodbye, or would that be too sad? I said that'd be too sad. So he respected that. His name was Mudgett, and that stood for Herman W. Mudgett. And when people would ask, so who was Herman W. Mudgett? My mom would just say, oh, he was a guy who married a bunch of women and then killed them. And they just acted like that was, a normal answer, or maybe they didn't want to press further. And more recently, I looked it up, and it turned out to be he was a very prolific serial killer, mostly for financial gain. And he was a con man. And he did have 3 wives at once that didn't know about each other. I don't remember reading anything about him killing them, so I'm not sure about that. But he killed plenty of people. So, therefore, they thought that was a good name for a child's dog. Now, my father, later, when I was visiting my father on the weekend, he lived in this pretty rural area. There was a cow. I remember the day that the cow got killed. One day there was a cow, and the next day there was just a blood stain on the ground, and that was maybe. So my father surprised me with these 2 little puppies, and her mom was with them, another little dog, but these were tiny little puppies. And my father said, well, I think we should name them Mug and Bug. And I looked at the one had markings exactly like Mudgett, and I said, no, they're going to be named Herman and Mudge. And Mudge was the one that looked like Mudgett. So clearly I did have a memory of the appearance and the full name, not just the last name, of my first dog. And eventually that the brown dog, Herman, wound up with my father, and the smaller dog, Mudge, became this one of these super psychic dogs that will do what you tell them to do, even when you don't tell them. You just think that you want him to do something, and he will somehow know that and do it. It was pretty amazing. When I was when my brother was a toddler, though, every time we would roughhouse, this little dog would want to protect me and saw my brother as my adversary. And so he'd go like try to nip at him. And this became a real problem. It became a problem. And my mom said, well, we might have to get rid of him if he's going to do that. And I said, that's not fair. And my mom did this thing I remember doing it a couple times where she just out of nowhere slapped me on the cheek and then raked her fingernails down my cheek. So, yeah. And another time I told you about the bakery called Oli's. I said, I told my mom, I only want bread. I only want bread from Oli's. And, that was a spoiled kid thing to say, obviously. So I deserved maybe to be knocked down a little peg. But she did the same thing, just slapped me and scraped the cheek with my fingernails. And the thing is, it would come out of nowhere. There would be like no building up to it. Some of the time there was, she did plenty of yelling, but so that happened. That all happened. So something more positive that happened. I was 9 and my mother and stepfather decided to go to Japan for a couple weeks. And they told me, look, if you want, we'll leave this up to you. You can go or not go, but if you go, you'll have to eat everything that's put in front of you. I didn't know what that meant. So I was like, nah. And then finally I changed my mind and said, oh, yeah, okay. And I was able to do it, except for once when I bit into like a bun and it had beans inside, and I was just, beans shouldn't be in there. It's not, the Japanese use beans as a sweet, and my brain couldn't wrap itself around that, so I couldn't eat it. But they let that go because they also one morning had been served rice with raw eggs on it for breakfast, and they could not eat that. So they were like, okay, we all get one thing we can't eat. That was it was a pretty fun experience. We went all over the island of Honshu, which is the island with Tokyo and all that. It was the early 70s. Japan was in like every developed nation had to go through this developing phase where it's just really badly polluted. So Japan was, the cities at any rate, not so much the countryside, but the cities were pretty bad. The smog was pretty bad. We went into Osaka. That was really smoggy. My father visited later and called it Mordor, where the shadows lie, which was the dystopian city in The Lord of the Rings. And so we were in Osaka and we just grabbed a place next to a bowling alley. And it turned out to be, this was one of Japan's love hotels. Love hotels are a thing in Japan because people lived tightly packed together, and whether they were, dating or whether they were married, they just didn't have a lot of privacy. So when they wanted to let loose a little and do stuff without doing it in the dark silently, they would go to these love hotels. And that's what we wandered into. Now, why they let an adult man and woman and a 9-year-old boy, I mean, I guess a customer is a customer and they didn't really care. And this place, I remember the setup. So the shower had a glass door that was completely transparent and you could see it from the bed. So somehow you couldn't see the toilet, fortunately, but you could just be in bed and see the shower and see through the glass. And I guess that was supposed to be sexy. And the TV had nothing on it but closed circuit Danish pornography. Denmark was the pioneer of modern porn, by the way. And I'll probably get more spam comments just of porn because I said the word porn. That's what happened with my last one. But Yeah, Denmark was a pioneer, and before the U.S. picked it up, and then the whole world eventually. Oh, and we went to Hiroshima. Now, my stepfather, who grew up in the 1950s, was fascinated by atomic bombs. He had grown up in the age of the duck and cover and all that stuff, and he was just fascinated with it for life. Like whenever there'd be a news story about two nations, coming to war together, which happens all the time and always has, um, he would say, "Wow, this is going to be the big one. I'll bet this is going to lead to a nuclear war." And my mom was like, "Every time there's something comes up somewhere, you think it's going to lead to a nuclear war. You're very um, apocalyptic." And when he got older, they slept in separate rooms like older couples sometimes do. His bed was a narrow bed, and right above it, he had an atom bomb themed calendar. And it didn't change from year to year. Once it got up there, it stayed up there. And there was a picture of an atom bomb explosion on every page. So naturally, we could not miss out on visiting Hiroshima. And it was interesting. Hiroshima, it was rebuilt, and as he said, they kind of looked at the atom bomb the way San Francisco looks at its earthquake of 1906. It was a very dramatic and destructive event, but then we got on with things and rebuilt and so forth. There were actually a lot of Americans there. There was an American school. I gave some of my leftover, I brought books along to read, children's books, and so my mom said, "Do you want to give them some of the books you finished?" So I did. There was an atom bomb museum, and that was interesting. And next to the atom bomb museum was the one and only building that was twisted around during the explosion, and they didn't tear it down. They tore all the rest of them down to rebuild. But this one they just left as it is, and it was quite remarkable. It had been like twisted around, and a lot of the like concrete on the outside had fallen off, so you could just see the metal skeleton. Yeah. And speaking of Japanese culture, around this time, my father, who, as I mentioned, had been a very Orthodox Jew up until, from his youth. His parents weren't, I don't think, but he picked it up when he was young and stayed with it until, I guess, in his 50s or so. What happened was that he had to go to the hospital for stomach surgery. This is the story. And so he asked the rabbi to come in. And apparently the rabbi, some reformed rabbi probably or whatever, he came in smoking a cigar and said, "Isn't science wonderful?" and walked out with him feeling no better and also choking on cigar smoke. He had already been communicating with the people who were involved with Tenrikyo, especially a particular reverend. So Tenrikyo, what they said, he had been involved with like science. He had been interested in science of mind and that sort of thing, but he didn't want a Christian version of it. So he was interested in this Japanese version of it. So Tenrikyo, what they said was, "We are a blend of Buddhism and Shinto." But in reality, it's pretty clear to me they were a blend of Buddhism, Shinto, and Christianity, because they had Buddhist ideas, like they believed in karma, reincarnation. Well, Buddhists call it rebirth, but they believed in reincarnation and working with your own mind, cleaning the dust, the bad thoughts out of your mind as if it was dust, doing a daily cleaning, which they did they had a whole prayer and these ritualistic hand movements, which I kind of learned. Yeah, so then he converted. I remember him eating bacon for the first time in his life, which probably wasn't good for his health. But he became very involved with the Tenrikyo community, and especially the Reverend that he knew. They became good friends, and later he would go to Japan. It's kind of ironic because he fought in World War II, and he never forgave the Germans, never, which is understandable, but no. His writing couldn't be translated into German, not under any circumstances. He didn't want to ride in German automobiles or tolerate people having German-made typewriters. He would have none of it. But he didn't serve in Europe. He served in the Pacific, ending up in Okinawa, where he was in the Navy, basically. He was in the Navy, and yeah, he was a medic, and apparently it was pretty traumatic for him. He didn't like to tell war stories. He seldom talked about the war. He didn't like to hang around veterans who liked to talk about the war. He really would prefer not to talk about it much. Occasionally he'd talk about something, usually something fairly pleasant, but not the gritty stuff. He was stitching people back together, so it's understandable. And when I was 11, now we're back to that age, I took a trip around him, a Greyhound trip. He got a 30-day Greyhound trip all over the country, and he took us all over the continental USA, seeing, scattered family of mine and of his, but sometimes of my mom's as well, and old friends of his. We spent a lot of time on the bus, but we were also other interesting places. We went to New York, where his grandmother was in New York City. She was nice. I liked New York. Every time I've been there, I liked it. Statue of Liberty, Staten Island Ferry, Empire State Building, all that good stuff. Plus my grandmother, plus some relatives I didn't like so much, great aunts that would pressure me to eat stuff I didn't feel like eating, and some other old couple that was talking about someone in their family who died of cancer, and talking about the smell and how they could never forget it. Didn't love that. I went to New Jersey to meet my father's father. Didn't interact with him much. The hotel he lived in had a swimming pool, and after all that time on the bus, that was my main focus. I love being able to swim. By the way, swimming, yeah, that'll come up a lot. So when I was 6 or so, my mother and stepfather enrolled me in swimming lessons. This was the 60s, and this thing that the teacher did, I don't think they do anymore, but they did then, which is that she grabbed my feet and pulled me to the bottom of the pool, even after I said not to. All the way to the bottom, eyes open. Yeah. So I told my folks, I don't want to go to swimming lessons anymore. So they didn't make me. But luckily, they went to the pool so often that at some point, maybe around age 9, I taught myself to swim. And later I would swim. I was never, I tried later taking swimming lessons. I still hated it, but I swam everywhere, oceans, all the way around the world. Really quite naively fearless until finally something happened I'll get to later that taught me some humility towards the ocean. Anyways, we went to Milwaukee, where I had some family on my mother's side. Great grandparents mainly. So one great grandmother was pretty cold and really didn't want to have much to do with this. She was too cold. My other grandmother was way too hot. So my father had a dream. He had an ex-girlfriend in Toronto, which isn't very far from Milwaukee, but he didn't have her address or phone number or anything. And Toronto is a pretty good sized city. But he had a dream telling him to go find his ex-girlfriend. Now I realize, just going to a large city and expecting to randomly run into who you want to is not terribly realistic. But at the time he asked me, what do you think? I said, yeah, go for it. What did I know? So he wound up sticking me with this great grandmother who I don't think really wanted me around for that long. And she was pretty awful. Later, I heard that she had seen her brother killed in a pogrom in Poland. So that might have been partly explained the way she was, but she was always angry. She was joyless, and she didn't like other people being happy around her. I was watching TV, and something funny came up, funny to me, and I started laughing, and she said, "What's so funny?" And it wasn't like, "Oh, what's so funny? Share the joke with me." No, it was like, "What's so funny? Why are you laughing? These are not laughing time. This is not a laughing world," or something. That's how it felt to me. And she told me, "Don't hang around with your father. Basically, he's with his beard. He's a weirdo. He has this long beard. Come on, we're Jewish. Jewish men are supposed to have beards. What's long beards? What's weird about that?" But anyway, you don't tell a kid to prefer one parent over the other. That's just bad. So I could not wait to get out of there and back on the road again. Oh, yes, important. So he also took me to the Milwaukee Zoo, and two important things happened. First of all, there was a petting zoo, and I managed to pet a chicken. Ever since the chicken attacks in Belize, I had been scared of chickens. This chicken was pretty mellow, so I was able to pet it and more or less go along with my business. Secondly, now when I say I'm twice exceptional, I mentioned that I seem to have taught myself to read at the age of 11. I mean, at the age of 3. And when I was 12, I was reading adult level books, like the books my mom was reading for college. I started reading that. That was when I was 12. Age 11 is when I learned to tie my shoes. Okay. Can you see the gap here? When I was younger, they tried to get me buckled shoes with a buckle, and the other kids said they were, that these are girls' school shoes. The boy went, "Those are girl shoes." And then I told my folks, and they were like, "Well, in Mexico, they don't consider shoes with the buckles to be girl shoes." Well, we weren't in Mexico, but they were trying to come up with a solution, shoes with Velcro, whatever. And then I actually somehow just bent over and tied my shoes when I was at the zoo, and my father said, yeah, he had tears in his eyes when he saw it. Yeah. So let's get back now, finally, to the place. Time flies. The place that my father called the flea circus. I stayed with him on the weekends, and it was pretty fun, you know. I like tried wine for the first time at that age. And I remember like at one party, like I drank a little and then I lay down in the middle of the floor and everybody else danced around me, which was cool. And one woman said, "And you were fascinated by Sheila's legs." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, what of it?" The testosterone was hitting me. There was this one woman there. Okay, trigger warning. There was this one woman there who took a liking to me. We got along. She was, I think, 24. She identified as a lesbian, but kind of an abstinent lesbian. And I remember I was at one meeting, a house meeting, and they were arguing over who got to use the sleeping platform in the backyard. And one guy wanted it because he really didn't have enough privacy, I guess, in his room to have sex with women he picked up. So he wanted the sleeping platform for that reason. And this woman, I'll call her Daphne, not the one Dave Chappelle talks about all the time, but I'll call her Daphne. I'm protecting the innocent and the guilty and so forth. She said, "Well, you don't need that platform in the backyard because all you want to do there is spill cum all over the place." And my father said, "You know, you have chosen not to engage in that aspect of life, but that doesn't mean everyone has." I think she somehow wound up getting a possession of that platform anyway. And it was all a bit ironic considering some events that happened later, but we'll get to that. She belonged to this band. It was called A Wood Nymph in Vandayar. And they invited me to be a part of it. I couldn't sing or play instruments, but they would put makeup on me and like to look like a lion or whatever, and I would jump out at the right time. So that's all I had to do. And my father, he later said, "Well, you were the only member of that band that was not a lesbian," which, maybe I was, maybe I wasn't, but yeah, that was correct. They were all lesbians. And okay, I'm thinking. So she would take me hitchhiking and we'd go, we would hitchhike around and stuff, and she'd busk on the streets, and then she'd buy some food for us, and right. So we were friends, and there were some childlike traits about her. She liked to listen to Walt Disney music, Walt Disney soundtracks, right? And I remember one of the other women in the band was teasing her about, all the money she earned from this gig was enough to buy 2 more Disney albums. And she got really mad. And she liked the Archies, which was a cartoon band modeled after the Archie people in the Archie comic books. And they did have a band that put out at least one song. Maybe not an original. The point is, even I thought that stuff was hokey. I didn't like that kind of music, but she did. So I tried to respect that, and sometimes, goofed around on it. And she also had, I heard some rumors that she had some history of mental health issues. One was she had attempted once to commit suicide by swallowing a bottle of iodine, which sounds like an awful way to do it. Fortunately, it failed. Another friend said that he had seen her once manifest a second personality. I think maybe a younger one. But anyway, she manifested, this other voice came out of her, and it was like one of the creepiest, things he'd ever seen in his life. Like it sent chills up him. So anyway, but she was totally nice to me, so I'm not dissing on her at all. So one night she said, "Well, would you like to sleep under the stars with me on the sleeping platform?" And I said, "Sure." So the bottom line is, and remember, I was 11. I knew that sex existed, but how it comes to pass was something I was not very clear on. How to make it happen, in other words. And so while she was asleep, trigger warning, I touched her everywhere. And I mean everywhere. I don't have to get into details, but there was full touching. And I was going to take it to the next level, if you know what I mean. I was going to consummate the friendship. And then she suddenly said, somebody's coming. And I rolled off. I'm like, what? And there was nobody coming. And then she said, well, somebody was going to come. I mean, I'm nervous that someone might come, and I don't want to sleep out here anymore. I'm going to go back to my room. Now you can come spend the rest of my life of the rest of the night in your room if you want, or you can go back to your father's room. And for whatever reason, I went back to my father's room, which I've kind of regretted later. Yeah, so the thing is, I've told that story to various women as an adult, and they said she was not asleep. There was no way that she was sleeping through all this. And the crown on the proof in the pudding, if you will, is my father told me later that she had said something to him. She said, yeah, I identify as a lesbian, but sometimes I'm attracted to very young boys. But it takes too much energy to fall in love with them. Now, he didn't put it together that I was the boy or one of the boys that she was talking about. And I didn't put it together for a while, but later I put it together. So this really brings up interesting questions about who was molesting who in this scenario. And, she never touched me, I touched her. But on the other hand, she kind of set up the situation where it could happen, and she let it happen, and whatever. So who knows? Bottom line, I did enjoy it. So, yeah. Another thing I remember happening in that place was that there was this guy. Apparently, he was a junkie. That's what I heard. He was a heroin addict, I guess. And there was this other guy there, and he was kind of an asshole. And he was a coke dealer and user. And he would tell this other guy, you're a junkie. We don't want no junkies around here, And my father was like, and he was selling cocaine, like, where was he coming from, So one day, I kind of liked him. Anyway, he broke a window for some reason, and his girlfriend said, I broke it. But everybody knew that he had broken it. And they were saying, the police are coming. The cops are coming, because we called them. And they did. And I remember they were putting him under arrest. And he was saying, I'm just standing here. Do you mind if I just stand here? And somehow this touched me, I felt bad for the guy. Obviously, he didn't fully have his wits about him. I felt bad for the dude. So, all things told, the age of 11 was one of the years that was rather eventful for me. Um, and I think we may as well. Well, now it's all the way 55 minutes and 14 seconds, which is a lot longer than the rest. Well, the last one, well, it's a little longer than the rest. It's 15 freaking minutes longer than the last one. So I better end it. And hopefully, from next time, we can start moving into the future. Yeah. Bye bye.